No? Now we're okay. All right. So tonight we're delighted to have Michael Talty here. Michael has come here before, and I know many of you have heard Michael before. Michael is the senior executive librarian at the local study center in the brand new Clare Library building. If you haven't been, you should definitely make a trip there. It's beautiful. Loads of space, lots of space to sit down, look at things, et cetera, et cetera. And Michael has been in that position, I think, for 2 years now. Is it 2 years? Yeah, 2 years. So we are delighted to have Michael. Michael was a former archivist with RTE. His huge archival knowledge. He's doing a fantastic job with another lady, Ciara Fahy. Some of you may have met her, in relation to the archives that are held in the Clare County Library, as well as new archival material that's come in. And Michael is going to be telling us tonight about the new archival material and how we can use that for our genealogical research. Okay, so thank you very much. Over to you, Michael.
Okay. Right, I'm just going to give an overview to what I'll talk about. I won't be talking for a full hour. I'll be talking for, I hope, about 40 minutes. I'm going to talk about the collections that we've taken in. I'm going to talk about the potential those collections might have for the kind of work you guys are interested in. I'll also talk about some of the work that we have done in relation to those collections, such as kind of conservation, digitization, cataloging, making stuff available. I'll talk about the new move to the new library, which of course has implications for our work, for storage, for research, and for kind of the relationships we'd have with, I guess, our users and with groups such as yourselves. And then I'll just kind of finish up then with talk about kind of the library and the work that's gone on in the library recently in terms of the move and in terms of upcoming projects and things that we'd like to host in the library and work that we'd like to do along with maybe the Clare Roots Society or with individual genealogists or with anybody who's kind of conducting research, really. I'm going to run through all of this in fairly, as I say, quick time, no more than, I'd say, 40 minutes. And then at the end of that, if you want to have a Q&A and talk to me maybe about the website, which we're redeveloping, about transcriptions and things like that, some of the work of which Clare Roots would have done with us before. Just any questions, really. So I'll just get straight into it. And I'm going to start off with, in terms of talking about collections that would have significance for kind of, I guess, genealogists, I want to talk first about the Bindon Blood collection, or the Bindon Blood family collection, correctly. It was a collection that was acquired, of course, by the Clare Roots Society for basically the people of Clare, and it's held by Clare Local Studies and Archives. It's a pretty amazing collection. And it was a fantastic buy. And at the center of it is, and you can see this this illustration here, and it's of, well, tenants of the Cranaher branch of the Bindon Blood family. Now, I'll just say, first of all, that we have a number of collections. We have a blood collection. We have a Bindon family collection of letters that my predecessor, Peter Byrne, acquired a number of years ago. Fantastic. Peter acquired some amazing collections, but this is a really lovely collection of letters relating to the Bindon family from the 1830s to the 1870s. This collection here is mainly kind of centered on the mid-19th century. It features kind of material such as you see here, which is lists of tenants, and then kind of information on where they live and other information as well. And this particular feature of the collection is, as the lecturer suggests, particularly interesting material for genealogists, because kind of in lieu of, let's say, the 1841 census material, and from then on to 1891 being destroyed, and this is before Griffith, there's information in this that kind of relates to before the Ordnance Survey. So you can see some of the old localities, some of the kind of tithe townlands, I guess, are kind of mentioned in it. So it's got some very, very interesting information. And we have basically digitized all of it. In terms of a blood collection, we, at the same time that we acquired this collection, we also acquired a collection of documents from descendants of the blood family themselves in Dublin. So between the information that we had from this collection and the documents from this collection, from the Bindon family collection, and then from the other collection in Dublin, we really have a fairly complete collection of documents which run, I would say, from about 1770s, and the last document dates to 1976. So it's when Rates finished, and you have all kinds of data on all the tenants, all the dealings, deeds, all kinds of material, and a huge amount of information on people, the people who were related primarily to the Cranaher estate, but also to the town of Ennis, to Bindon Street and all the other areas that would have been owned. The ground rent would have been owned by the Bindon family, and then a whole lot of other data besides. And that's the interesting thing about all these collections. But I wanted to state this collection in particular is it's the amount of people that feature. And that is kind of your lifeblood in terms of the Clare Root Society, and it's very important to us as well. I'm going to talk next about another collection. It's different to the Bindon collection in that it's a much smaller focused collection, but no less fascinating in its own way. And it's the account books for Carliscon Mill. And I did a talk last year on mills and milling in West Clare. And while I was there, a lady came up to me and literally gave me this set of account books. And what you have are account books that go from about 1846 to 1852. Carliscon Mill, located on the edge of Kilnaboy, kind of Kilmanaheen, and relevant to the town and area of Ennis-Diamond, and in particular to the Ennis-Diamond markets, but also going down to Corofin and the Corofin mills as well. So they have relationships with the woolen mills, Dwyer's woolen mills in Ennis-Diamond, with the Ennis-Diamond mills, the mills on the falls in Ennis-Diamond, and then also with the mills, the Clifton mills in Corofin. And when I say relationship, I mean in that they seem to be processing material in conjunction with those institutions, with those businesses, and they also have dealings with those businesses, and there is also correspondence with those businesses, some of which was kind of attached to the account books. But the account books themselves have I guess listings of all of the people that dealt. So you have businesses in the town of Ennis-Diamond, businesses in Corofin, and the general businesses in the area. You also have all the farmers, and the farmers themselves will bring their, I guess, the grist to the mill. They'll bring meal for their cattle. They'll bring corn to be processed into flour, but also because the mill is convertible to being a woolen mill or a tuck mill. A tuck mill is a fulling mill, and it's at the first stage of the development of wool. The wool is beaten until the impurities are taken out, and then the farmer can bring the wool back, and the wool can be spun, and it can be used for that kind of home industry, but also can be used for the kind of industrial scale activity that you would see, for instance, with O'Dwyer's, where they would literally go in one end as a sheep and come out the other end as a tweed suit. It's a factory in the modern sense. And then in terms of the Clifton mill, it's kind of food production. So what's interesting in this is, in terms of all these interactions, it's a business mill, they're business records rather, but they're records again about people, and they mention people in their home place. They mention entire families in terms of the records as well, which is most unusual. Usually you have the head of the family, the dad, the farmer, but in this case you'll see the women in the house, you'll see the children who bring along the materials. So there's kind of all kinds of different records, and it's quite interesting. They're in a fairly poor condition. The records that come from businesses, and in particular from milling businesses, tend to be in the worst condition, because literally they're in the middle of production, so that they don't survive very well. But these are in pretty good nick, and probably will require some kind of transcription project. We've digitized them, but with the best of efforts, the digitization process probably won't work. Whereas if you looked at the previous collection we were looking at there, which is the Bindon blood collection, yeah, absolutely, you could digitize that, and we'll be able to put that straight up. as is, and I don't think it's going to require that kind of extra level of work from Larry's team, basically. So yeah, so that's interesting with that. That's something we're going to work on later on, but there's an awful lot of information in it. And at the moment, what we're trying to do is we're liaising with other county archives and with archives in Dublin. The first thing we're trying to do is we're trying to get records, for instance, from the Wyndham family and from the Leconfield and the Thomond collections, which are held in the National Archives, and get them brought back down to Clare so that we can have local researchers and indeed people like yourselves to work on them. I'm going to talk to you in a while about a Wyndham book or a Leconfield book that was found in Kilrush and that has an awful lot of interesting information, and which we have scanned and which Eric has seen, and which has an awful lot of interesting information in it. But there's a whole lot more retained in Dublin, and there's a whole lot more in Petworth that can be digitized and made available to us, that again contains information, all kinds of information really, which would be most useful in lieu of the absence of census materials and of that kind of data about people that you know, there's such a problem in terms of genealogy in Ireland. Just to mention that this was donated by the Tyne family, the family who ran the mill, and their descendants. Yeah, they're still there today, and yeah, it's a great collection. We'd hope to. It's several hundred pages, so it's really interesting. This next one is what we call the HV McNamara collection, but really it's the McNamara family and also the O'Brien family. I guess the people who are connected with the Falls Hotel and their estates again in and around Ennis Diamond. A huge amount of material that has been held at Clare Archives, I would estimate, for a number of years, and which we have only managed to go through in the last year or so, really. It's a big collection. 58 those metal legal boxes, big boxes of material, a very, very large range of time for such a comprehensive collection. It would go from the time of Captain Stackpool, who would be a guy who would have ran businesses all the way from Ennis Diamond, lived in near Milltown, and had land all over Clare. And from his time and from his relationships to the O'Brien family, who would have been resident at that point in time in what's now the O'Brien Castle, now the Falls Hotel, and then later on the McNamara family, who were resident and very active and almost, I suppose you could say, infamous, and related to Dylan Thomas as well, connected. But what you have is a huge amount of material, 14,000 pages, which we have now digitized. It's got all kinds of documentation, again, account books and lists of tenants and all this type of thing, but an awful lot of very interesting material, which dates up to the 1990s. This is a transcript that was made for a case that was, I think, dating to the 60s, and it's of a will of one of the Francis McNamara, an earlier will of him, and there's a huge amount of interesting information, which if you, when the PowerPoint presentation is released and you can blow it up, it's got a huge amount of information, huge amount of people, a huge amount of places, and I can make the whole full document available to you. It's got a huge amount of data in it, and it's very, very interesting. And in its context, when it is put up online, I think it will be, I guess, a relevant resource for that kind of research into people. I just mentioned the Leconfield estate, the successor, the Wyndham family, the successors to the Earls of Thomond, the people who kind of took the lands over in the 1740s when the main O'Brien-Thomond line died out. The reason for which that most of these documentation which relate to all these the great Thomond lands in Clare have now ended up in Sussex at Petworth House and part of the Petworth House archives. But on occasion you will find materials that seem to have remained in Clare. And this it's a book containing a huge amount of information relating to the estate. It's got a huge amount of information relating to Clare and Ennis. For me, a very interesting part of it relates to the running of the mills, the running of the mills as well, and HM Macbeth, but I'll talk about that in a second. But the running of the markets and of the market house, and of the development of the market and the mall in Ennis. And it's very, very interesting, because again, it's the kind of the main movers in kind of business in Ennis, and also then as well their kind of interaction with the big boys, with this guy Leconfield, who's a very, as you might know, Lord Leconfield, one of the Wyndhams, was a very proactive landlord who came over to Ireland and got heavily involved, for good and for bad, in the affairs of the people of Clare, and in running estates. His Leconfield cottages and houses are all over the county. His mark was very distinct indeed. And this is from slightly later times, in the 1850s and 60s, but it's of that time. And again, a huge amount of data and a huge amount of information. And from my point of view, kind of been interested in these, I suppose, sort of industrial and business archives. It's mention of a person such as H.M. Macbeth, who's a very interesting person, the person who was responsible for building the flour mills, and much of the kind of industrial infrastructure in Ennis in the 1830s, and then promptly going bust. He is mentioned as being in charge of the markets, and there's also information as well on kind of his life afterwards and the life of his family, and that directly segues into the next. Oops, I think I've just put that on. Yeah, the next collection I'm going to talk about, which is Bannatyne records. Now, Bannatyne records are records relating to the mills of Ennis. And if you remember or ever have heard of the flour mills of Ennis, basically opposite the Maid of Erin, there's a mill wheel. It's all that remains today of a corn mill or a meal mill that was on one side of the river. On the other side of the river, where today you find the memorial to the 1995 hurlers, there was a very, very considerable building, which was a flour mill. But it wasn't just a flour mill. Like the O'Dwyer woolen factory that was developed in the 1870s by Stackpool and the O'Briens and the O'Dwyer family, in the 1830s, at a much earlier period, this chap here, H.M. Macbeth, the fellow that you can see at the top of the page, he invested a huge amount of money, many, many, many thousands of pounds, to build this massive complex where literally corn would go in at one end and a loaf of bread would come out the other. So it was a huge milling concern with several wheels, mill wheels and stones and multiple stories, and a huge amount of workers, and also a bakery and also shops. And then he also built the stores. And after 10 years of being extremely profitable, from, let's say, in or around 1830 to about 1840, he was basically done in by his business partner, who had lost a lot of money, and they were declared bankrupt. And such was the sympathy that was felt for this H.M. Macbeth that he was taken care of by the Wyndhams and taken care of by a lot of the landed families, the Stammers and the Stackpools, and he played a prominent role in the economic life of the town. To talk about these kind of records, why am I kind of talking about this guy a lot? Well, this guy, he creates a business that employs a huge amount of people, and I'll go into some of the records that remain that kind of list these workers and list these people who worked and were integral to the life of the town. My wife's family, the Dinans, would have come from Cork and would have lived on the what's basically Old Mill Street, and would have come in as workers for the Bannatyne family, and thereafter lived in the area that the workers would have lived in, and thereafter then would have lived in Hermitage, which is an area developed afterwards. So there's a kind of a link there from that kind of early part of the 19th century and what this guy created. Now, his business goes bust. It's immediately taken over by the Bannatyne family, and that's what most people associate the mills and the mill development and the mill business with, and they're in control of that business from about 1840 to the 1930s. And they are major employers in the town. They are not the same as Macbeth, in that Macbeth is a producer of flour. He's a creator, and he is basically creating business in Clare. The Bannatynes have their business in Ennis as an extension of their main business in Limerick. It's mainly for storage. There is a certain amount of production, but really it's an ancillary business. And as the I guess the century goes on, more and more, even though there is the development of steam power and all kinds of other things there, it's a lesser business. So this guy, as I say, he's interesting, and he's kind of mentioned in these records. These records themselves come from the old mill office, which is a red brick building. It's now used by some kind of Clare business development group. They were found in the early 90s. They were held by the library. Then they were stored in the Oris. At one point, they ended up in Beach Park, and we found them there about a year ago, about 4 or 5 boxes, and there's a very, very large amount of interesting material in it. This is a list of tenants. Again, one of Bannatyne's tenants is Macbeth, and he's treated very well by the Bannatynes. There's a certain amount of sympathy, I guess, for his predicament. This is up into the 1870s and 1880s, and then his son, and they lived in the town for quite a while. So there's a lot of material on tenants of the Bannatynes, because they buy property in the town. They develop the Presbyterian Church, which eventually ended up as being part of the De Valera Library, and that they are involved in the life of the town. What is interesting as well is that we have other little booklets, like this tenants booklets, for instance, relating to bogs. And one of the things that they needed was a kind of source of power for their steam production. So they basically take turf from all over Clare, and they have these little books there of all of the people that they deal with, all of the farms they're dealing with, and again, a huge amount of information on the people who are in the farms and who are supplying them, and also the carters. And carters are really important because they're moving stuff all the time. As I was saying earlier, it's not really a production setup anymore. This is more of a kind of a depot. And they're getting their stuff from either Canada, they're processing it in Limerick, they're also kind of storing and processing it in Ennis, and they're kind of moving it all over the place, and they're also bringing things in. And again, these will link to some later collections that we'll talk about after this. So, for instance, the Bannatynes, they're the managers for the Scottish Widows Fund, First Life Assurance, kind of set up in Ennis. You kind of see Alexander Bannatyne's signature at the side of that. That actually dates to the 1840s, and it's something that they kind of did very early on. And we have a bit of information, we have a bit of work done on circulating libraries in Ennis. Circulating libraries were an early form of kind of private library that were run within shops, particularly pharmacies, but you also find in Ennis that a lot of the newsagents ran these shops. They're kind of a small collection of books that maybe Catholics can access at a very, very low price. They can pay maybe a penny for every 6 months, and they can take books in and out. An awful lot of the stuff is self-improvement type of stuff. Toohey's shop in Jail Street, later on O'Connell Street. The Tooheys are several of them are journalists who work for the Clare Journal. They're linked to the Knox family. They set up in business as newsagents, but also they're basically dealing and selling paper, and then they run these circulating libraries. And part of this circulating library setup and this self-improvement setup is selling insurance in the shop. So again, there are things of lists of people from these shops, and there's a lot of very, very interesting information on people in the town, and people that might not necessarily be represented in a lot of the kind of records that you would normally get, where again, it's the dad, the head of family, and so on. In the middle, there's some information that was typed out on cartage to Clifton. I was talking about like how they transported from their depot out around, in this case, all the way to Clifton, and you have the names of all the drivers. This goes through the 1840s, these lists, until about I think the 1870s. So there's a lot of interesting information in it, and it would seem town or thereabouts people. Again, you have kind of workmen's accounts. And in the workmen's accounts, I mentioned about my wife's family, that there are other people here who worked in the business. And you will have kind of who's employed permanently, who's employed seasonally, and kind of, you know, the people who are kind of bringing in from the town, the people in Clarecastle that they're employing. One of the things that's really important about this whole setup, this depot type business, is that it's almost more important who's working in the railway or who's working in the local harbour as who's working at the centre kind of area. So you have, for instance, your main mill stores in Ennis, and you have your main mill producing kind of setup there, and then you have this really large store in Clarecastle, and then you have the port in Clarecastle, and you have the kind of interaction with that, and what was kind of going on there, and the people that were involved with that. And it's the same kind of for the life of the town and for the area around it. They're very interesting documents. We'd hope to digitize these. I don't think that they'd really need to be transcribed, but we'll see. Finally, just to say about the other end of the kind of the Bannatyne era, which is talking about a document here from 1929. So Bannatynes morphs from being the kind of Scottish family that run the mills in Limerick, and then taken over by Goodbuddies, and then eventually taken over by the Ranks Mill, and it runs as this business until the 1980s. And eventually a lot of the documentation relating to the Bannatyne, Goodbuddy, and then Ranks operation ends up with Roach's Feeds, which is a company that still exists in Limerick, and has also gone to England to several companies, and some of which is now in the possession of the Industrial Heritage Association of Ireland. And this is an interesting document in that it's employees of Bannatynes in 1929, and the majority of them are employees working at the railway yard. So there are people that are either kind of taking material from West Clare and from other parts of Clare and basically deposit them in Ennis, and they're doing some kind of processing in Ennis, or they're shipping stuff out. So the stuff kind of been moved in, stuff been moved out, and it's been there's a lot of kind of moving of material at various stages of completion, and you have all the kind of people that are kind of involved. And a very small number of them actually work in the kind of mills themselves. It seems to be mainly kind of storekeepers. And as I say, it's the people in the kind of railways. And it will be interesting, is what we're trying to get is to work with the people who now run the combined Iarnród Éireann CIE and Bus Éireann archives, which have in the last 2 years have now been amalgamated together under one archivist. And that archivist has reached out to a lot of the institutions such as ourselves in Clare to talk about kind of what do you have about the people who work in these industries kind of close to you, and we'll tell you what we have. So the train leaves and it ends up somewhere else, and even who's on it and who's driving it. And there'll be people from Ennis, from Clarecastle, from all the way along the line and right out through the West Clare as well. So again, these are records that relate to people and all kinds of people that would probably fall through the cracks. And what's interesting, last year I did a talk on the Ordnance Survey, and one of the most interesting things about the Ordnance Survey is that it's really hard to determine who is actually working for the Ordnance Survey in Ennis at any particular point in time, because so many of the staff are on the move. They're literally surveying all over the country. And at the time of the 1911 census, there are about maybe 40 of them in and around the town, kind of doing their work and doing their stuff and doing the drawings and whatever. And then there's about another 40. And they're all the way up to Roscommon. They're out in Tipperary, and and when you kind of go through all of the records, you can kind of find that there's Kellys from Dura. There's all kinds of other people that are there. They're working as kind of assistants, all kinds of other things, and they're Clare people, and they're out there, but they just happen not to be in Clare on that particular day because they're like traveling salesmen or whatever. They're on the move, and that's what's interesting in these kind of records, is that even though you're kind of thinking, oh, it's another part of the country or whatever, it's these are records about our people kind of going somewhere else, and they just didn't happen to be there that particular day. And we tend to think that people were kind of stationary. They didn't move very far beyond their own place. But you can even see with the Carliscon mills that there are farmers bringing grain and corn and all kinds of things, maybe 12 and 13 miles to that mill for whatever reason, a very small mill, and it's hard to understand why, but they have the capability to do it, and they don't seem to be very wealthy people. The last kind of thing I'm going to talk about is kind of different kinds of records. We've acquired 2 Revox players. They'd be reel-to-reel recording players. I had a certain amount of experience in a previous job I was in, working with audio and audiovisual archives. So I'm interested in trying to get a lot of our tapes and video and other things, and to basically back them up onto digital, and also maybe to make transcripts for this material. And there are two collections which we have received in recently. One is from a guy called Rolly Brown. Rolly Brown is still alive. He's an folklorist, a musicologist, and he's a person that recorded a lot of music in Ireland in the 1970s, which culminated in an album being made. And he donated all of his reel-to-reel tapes to the Clare Libraries, which we were able to play back a lot of. And what we found was that in between the music, there's a hell of a lot of talking. And this talking consists of a very, very large amount of information about people. To an even greater degree, there's Jim Carroll's Jim Carroll's collection. Jim is a Liverpudlian. He's been recording Irish music since the 1970s with his wife, and they've lived in Clare since the 1990s. He's getting on a bit now, so he's donated a lot of his material. A lot of his material over the years, he'd kind of given it in piecemeal, and a lot of it is up on the website, including my cousin Vincey Boyle singing Wheelie Wheelie Walia, which somebody from RTE looked for today, which I was amazed at. They actually got in about 5:15, somebody. But and it was from Jim's collection. But again, Jim was brilliant. He talked to Junior Crehan, JC Talty, Martin Talty, all these guys. And he was particularly involved with traveller collections, and went all over Ireland. But he's very, very good at talking to people, and there's a huge amount of information which he records. And he talks about people and their working lives and the kind of work that they do. And there's one section which I find, again, very, very interesting, because I'm interested in weavers. We're working at the moment on information to do with the Flynn woolen mills in the bridge, in 6 Mile Bridge. And the Flynns themselves, they developed the business very early in the 19th century, and it continued to the 1960s. It's a business that's there at the same time as Brendan O'Regan and all that kind of stuff. When Shannon Development is developed, they're still there. And one of the things that they did was they used to take in workers from the Artane school and from other schools, and they basically kind of gave them a trade. And in the same kind of way, these people then, or as I'm going to say about the people on the Ballard Road, but these people then, these Artane folk, a lot of them stayed in Clare. So the Carew families, Ciara Carew works in the library. Her ancestors were weavers, and they worked at a Cracklow. And she's written a thesis on it. And there's an awful lot of recordings that with members of the Carew family on weaving and how it developed from that. In the same way, in this Milltown context, there were mills all over Milltown, and from these mills developed a thriving weaving industry. And in Jim's collection, there's kind of talking on the Ballard Road, the Dwyers, the Learys, the Sullivans, McCarthy's, Doherty's, Tobins, and that guy Dan Tobin, the Secretary of the American Federation of Labour, and then how it kind of dies out. So it's this kind of thing that you're talking about, families and what they're doing and who they are, and you can, the context is quite remarkable. The picture is of the McMahon family, and they're the McMahons of the Dowk Mills. The name for the townland is Powlavullen, and Powlavullen is basically the depression in which the mill lies, meaning that it's a watermill. When you say Powell, that means it's low. And that means it's a water mill because it's got water power. When it says Canuck or Knock, so Knockavullen means it's a windmill. Tunlagee could also mean it's a windmill. There's all kinds of different names. Mills are ubiquitous. Industry is ubiquitous in ancient Ireland. And there's this kind of relationship between the old townland names and the old locality names, between the families, and then between the modern era. And you kind of get this kind of thing in folklore and folklore recordings about families and people that you mightn't find elsewhere in records. And it's very, very interesting, particularly out in the rural areas. So this collection here, the Bentley Estate collection, we're kind of back into the kind of stuff like the Wyndhams and that, but it's at a much smaller level. Bentley family living in Hurdlestown House, Broadford area. They're there for 200 years. There's nothing like hugely remarkable about the Bentleys and their estate, other than that they seem to have been absolutely fastidious record keepers. So unusual for a family or for a business or for an estate of that size. They have a muniments room. So they keep an actual archive of all of their stuff. And it was, by all accounts, absolutely comprehensive, very, very large. And was only destroyed by a local farmer kind of going in and setting fire to the records that were in the 1970s. But members of the family had taken away a lot of the papers, and one branch that was living in Tralee got in contact with Pat O'Brien, Pat, the bookshop man, Celtic bookshop man, and the dedicated historian of all things Broadford, and he got in contact with us, and we had it donated to us. Fantastic collection. We found within it, within correspondence in the 1920s, an estate map of part of the Newmarket on Fergus, I think part of Kilnasula, and then another one then of around Carragorn House, and showing a picture of Erlenbeg Castle with the full wall around it, and the little kind of depiction of the little what's called cannon at the end, which Martin Breen was fascinated. He blew the whole thing up to the nth degree. It dates to 1723, so it's one of the oldest estate maps that's still kind of extant. You've got the Molan one from 1701, and you've got the other one then from of Ennis from 1736. There's not that many of them, and there's very few of them in Clare, and we have this one in Clare, and anybody can come in and take a look at it. In terms of what we're interested in terms of genealogy and all that kind of thing, you've got, again, a huge amount of correspondence with tenants, local businesses, and then a lot of correspondence with the Unthanks in Limerick, and by extension with the Unthank McNamara's, their branch, living in Corrafin. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but related to something that we're also digitizing. The material relating to the land transfer, material relating to the maps, relating to the land commission, and to the kind of changeover from people being landlords to being landowners, and the transfer of land to the local community. A lot of interesting material there, an awful lot of interesting correspondence there. And again, a huge amount of material on local people, all the way from Limerick and kind of gone up beyond Broadford. So it's a very small, it's only 2 boxes, but a very, very interesting collection. The last one I'm going to mention isn't, I wouldn't say it's that kind of collection that has a huge amount of mention of people, because it's relating to Clarecastle Harbour. And Eric was instrumental in getting this donated. The Power family, who run Power's Pub. John Power recently finished up in business there, and it was handed over by the Power family to ourselves, mediated by Eric. It's really, really fantastic collection. It's everything kind of to do with the harbour masters, and then a lot of other material like checks and chits, some correspondence. But these books that are related to the kind of the Castle Harbour office, and going from about, I think, 1915 to kind of the final closure of the operation in about 1976-77, and it's the detail and the information that you see in these, and that there's a huge amount of talk about kind of the harbour, but also the village, and also kind of the place and how the thing operates. And it's very, very interesting because they really are great minutes, and they go on for quite a long time, and they relate, as do many collections. We have a collection of diaries which Francis Ivers kept. Now, they were farm diaries, But when they go through, let us say, interesting times, such as the War of Independence, then she's dealing with the Brennans. And the interesting kind of, it's what she doesn't say as much as what she does say. You know, we went into a room, we had a momentous discussion. Our house is going to survive or whatever, you know. In this kind of case, it's sort of, you know, here we are kind of in 1920, we're trying to run our business, we're trying to do whatever. We've got an awful lot of pressure from the British Empire. We've got an awful lot of pressure from kind of the local community. We've got all these kind of things going on. And, you know, how do we survive? How do we persevere? And then afterwards, how did they kind of get on? And how did it? Because it survives into the 1970s. And you have ships coming in until, well, 1969. So it does kind of survive. And it is an interesting story in itself. It's not necessarily a genealogical kind of a story, but I think it's a great kind of human story, and it's very, very interesting. And business collections can often be like that. So that's kind of the collections that I'm kind of talking about that we've taken in that I thought would be of interest. But there's a couple of things I just like to kind of mention. The first is that Paul O'Brien in Kilrush is organising with us to have the Glynn family collection donated. And the Glynns are the big boys of industrial kind of production in Kilrush. They run a shipping line to America. They run kind of all kinds of different mills, shops, concerns, ice cream factories, you name it. They're very, very interesting. They're very, very long surviving and long standing. And, you know, if we manage to get that collection, I think it would be not just interesting to talk about the life of the town of Kilrush, but you're talking of a whole kind of part of Clare, and again, you know, all the people involved. It's got to be very, very interesting. On a much smaller scale, Owen Shanahan, he wrote that the man who held the gun, donated a collection to us there of ODs of Kilrush, their shop traders, shop owners. Again, they're involved in this kind of shipping business at a kind of a different kind of a level. They're involved in the courts and in the local government in Kilrush. Very, very interesting people, all kinds of different kind of correspondence, account books, all kinds of things there. Ennis Diamond boot factory accounts. This is the kind of successor business to the mill that was on the tucking mill, or the woolen mill that was on the falls. And again, we're hopefully, we've had some material donated, and it is very, very interesting in that a huge amount of material on the workers survives. So they have really, really comprehensive lists of all the people in Ennis Diamond and beyond who are kind of working in their concern. And the last one there is photocopied files. It's an academic in Cork. It's going to be he's basically copied 1,500 pages from the Quit Rent Office, and it's in relation to the whole Fergus reclamation, and he sent on some of the stuff to me, and it looks really, really comprehensive. And again, very, very, very interesting stuff that relates to, you know, the reclamation, the railways, the possible Ponzi schemes and embezzlement of money, or the whole story. And it's a fairly dramatic story, and we're looking to get down to Cork as quick as we can and get all of this material. I'll just quickly just mention some of the material relating to local studies work. So we've acquired a number of kind of antiquarian materials, a list of which we have inside, and you can check out. The one we're probably most excited about at the moment is we managed to get a 1732 Irish English dictionary, which had been published in Paris. It's Begley's dictionary, but it's got a Hugh McCurtain grammar book kind of tacked on to the end of it. So it kind of has a Clare connection, and it really is a lovely book. And anybody who wants to come in kind of look at whatever all kind of books that we kind of managed to pick up, you know, we'd be delighted to kind of go through it with you. The Clare Past Forum, which was part of the old kind of website, and was, you know, kind of something for genealogists and such folk to basically have a chat on, had been mediated by a guy in Canada and by a library in Canada, and also Sheila Duddy was moderating, and those two people wanted to step away from it. So we've taken all that back. We're now moderating, administrating, and so on. that whole resource. And there's a lot of guides and other things that are on it that were a little outdated. They were from 10 and 15 years ago. So we're going to try and update that, and we're going to try and kind of do a bit of outreach and get out to people, see if they're interested in kind of getting this thing maybe kind of going a bit more. We have a lot of digitization projects going on. There's GUM, George Unthank McNamara, who was an antiquarian who worked alongside Westrop. Huge amount of material in terms of his correspondence with a guy called Twig, who was a famous kind of producer of pedigrees and of old kind of histories of Irish families. He's an Englishman who worked mainly in England on kind of a lot of the records that have been left over there. And then, of course, Westrop was a very famous historian in his own right. And this guy, George Unthank McNamara, liaised with all of them, and he's a very interesting person. The correspondence is great. We're collecting material from cancelled books from different parishes throughout Clare. Mary Grogan has given us most of the material for the 7 parishes in Newmarket. We have a fair amount of material now got on Kilmenaheen, Kiltenley, and other of these kind of parishes up around that side. We've some stuff got from Ebbard O'Loughlin, from around the Ballyvaughan area, and then to Rathborney, all that side as well. Eric, of course, and Kathy have done all the kind of material on Cologne, Ballier, and Clare Abbey, Clare Castle. And it's great. There's people from all over the county have been kind of giving us stuff, and it's a really, really great resource. And what we've done is we've scanned all of it. It's all available on USBs and whatever like that. If you want to come in and take a look through it, it's handier than taking the jaunt all the way up to Dublin. You never know, there might be something in there that you don't need to make the long kind of drive for. Now, we host big collections on this thing called the Digital Repository of Ireland, which is this site as part of the Royal Irish Academy. And that'll be stuff, that'll be all the public kind of authority collections and so on. But smaller collections, we're going to try and host ourselves. So that's stuff like Carolus Gone Mills, the smaller collections, the Bind and Blood collections and things like that. We're going to digitize them, we're going to put them up on our own site and make them available. And Eric Shaw pointed this out to me, that somebody had done this in Wicklow archives already, and it looks great. And because of this thing with the cloud, you can store huge amounts of material. So anybody who has any suggestions on any collections that they think that we could transcribe, we could digitize, we can digitize things in fairly short order. We digitized the Clare Castle Harbour collection, I think, in about 2 days. And it's a big enough, it's several books, like so we can get them up and out fairly quick. So developments of the new website, yeah, we've moved over 45,000 articles, items and images out of 70,000. We're still working on it. Transcription projects have been basically held up. We have the freeholders list, which Declan Barron gave us, and we're ready to go with it. And as I say, new ideas for the Clare Past Forum. Anybody who has any ideas in it, please. But just give us a little bit of leeway, because it'll be later in the year when we have this website sorted, but we will have it sorted. Everything will be exactly the same as it was. And what we would hope is that all these kind of links and URLs and all this stuff will all be kind of updated and made as good as possible. And particularly there will be improvements in terms of the maps. The maps there's great improvements that can come in with that. And it's linked into all this stuff to do with the national heritage stuff, linking into all these castles and sites and stuff that's been discovered in places. So there's a lot of work on that. Commemoration and exhibition plans for 2025. There's the OD clan gathering in June, and we'd be hoping that we can employ all of yourselves and some of the experts and people to come along and maybe give their advice. We could have sessions and so on. One of the things that we would be interested in is maybe kind of working in partnership with kind of genealogists and other people, so they can kind of provide their services and maybe have a space that they can do their stuff with people and maybe develop a relationship and so on. And that'll be quite interesting. We're also going to do an exhibition for it, and Martin Breen, who's doing a talk, has a big mega pedigree thing done, going from the original casts of the Dalcatians all the way down to the present day. It's really interesting. In terms of other kind of commemorations, you've got the bicentennial of the freeholders, and then the O'Connell 250 anniversary. And really what we're talking about there is it's commemorating the O'Gorman Mahon Steel, all the lads from Clare, basically. So we're gonna basically have a a series of events for our History Week, which will be really centred on that, and we'll also have exhibitions, and we'll be hoping to talk to all the experts in that area, maybe about kind of working with us. And the kind of last thing kind of mentioned there is Paddy Hannon, centenary of Paddy Hannon's death. Paddy Hannon is the man that discovered gold at Carrolgorley. He's the kind of very interesting person in that there is a possibility that he was also involved in the great Clare gold find, 1854 as well. There's been a lot of material written on him recently, and we're going to do an exhibition and some material, and yeah, there's a good bit of work on that. Last thing now, changes in the library. We have a new service. We've got a new headquarters. In terms of what I do, compared to, let's say, what Peter Byrne would have done, Peter would have specifically been a librarian. I'm a librarian and archivist. I'm working with Ciara, who's a librarian and archivist. We handle all these archival collections, a lot of which I talked about tonight, but also all of the old library kind of stuff, all the index cards and the research and any kind of help that you'd want, any kind of books that you want, please come to us. Yeah, absolutely. The new website, as I mentioned, transcription backlog, we'll sort that out. All the book collections, some of which had been located in other places following a flood in 2009, are all back in Ennis. Everything is back inside, and we should be able to get it for you. If we can't get it for you, it's missing, and we'll buy in a new copy. My apologies. We're recataloguing about 30% of the items so that we try and make them more specific. Access has also been enhanced for archives for Ennis, and we also have the possibility, well, we have the access to Beach Park. So collections outside in Beach Park, we can bring people out on a one-by-one basis to look at things like the H.V. McNamara collection and things like that, if they want. With digitisation, as I mentioned, we're going to try and digitise smaller collections ourselves and put them up on our website. We're also going to try and digitise the larger collections and put them up on kind of national sites, and then we're working with all these other local bodies on business collections and other things. And then you've got all the exhibitions, transcriptions, outreach to such as I'm doing tonight. And the big thing is aid to conservation. If you have aid for conservation for your books or whatever like that, you can talk to us about it. And Sinead.
Great stuff. Very, very good. Very informative. Lots of things to consider going into the library to visit, to look at, and lots of things anyway to consider in relation to what you've mentioned about preservation and all that, and the new archives. Does anybody have any questions? Anyone want to ask Michael any questions? Now's the time. Michael?
Have you any collection on private banking in your system?
No, we don't have any collection on private banking in Ennis, but we do have material from, for instance, the Glynn collection, where they have a considerable amount of correspondence which relates to them corresponding with O'Connell's National Bank in order to raise money and to develop their business further. We also have materials from the O'Dwyer collection, where they're again trying to develop their business in the 1870s, and they're talking to banks about how can they develop their kind of business. So in the period immediately following the famine and following the death of O'Connell, banking exploded in Ireland, and all of a sudden you get a huge amount of capital available to Catholic business people and Catholic business families. So you tend to get a lot of this kind of information. But we don't have anything relating to the banks themselves, but we have a lot of correspondence in collections with the banks. And of course, you look at something like the Harbour Commissioners or the Harbour Masters collection from Clarecastle, there's a huge amount of chits, of checks, of all kinds of material from the various banks in Ennis and how they're kind of dealing with them. So while I would say we don't have a banking collection, we have a huge amount of material that relates to banks.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions they want to ask? No? No. Okay. I think we're... Thanks very much, Michael.
No worries, Les. No problem.
Very informative. It's great to hear about the archives in the library and the availability of them now. And really, Michael and Ciara are doing phenomenal work in bringing these collections to light and preserving them and cataloging them. I mean, I can't say enough about it, because every time I come in, there's something new that's happened that Michael is telling me about. And really, it is just amazing what is out there and what you've been able to find that has actually been in the library system but might not have been known, for one reason or another. So it's great to have two archivists there that know what they're doing and you know, can bring about the work that is there for the rest of us to be able to enjoy. And I would encourage people, I think that there is certainly an opportunity if people are interested in getting involved in transcription projects or in assisting in some way,
Yeah.
that you know, maybe you make yourselves known to Michael or have a think about it. Maybe there's something very specific that you're interested in, a specific collection that you'd be interested in transcribing, or, you know, whatever.
Sure.
That it would be, you know, make your name known to Michael, and because it's good to have the volunteers. It really is phenomenal that the library website, we all know that all the work that's been done on it is all done by volunteers from all over the world, and everybody can access it wherever you are, which is great. So it's a real testament to all the volunteers, you know, that have done that work, and for Michael and Ciara and the library service to be continuing to host the library website and the Taking on the Clare Past Forum. So thanks very much for that. That was a great talk, Michael. Thank you very much. That's great. So